All right, welcome back. Episode 2, Swedenborgian Life. Thanks for joining us. First things first, my name is Curtis Childs, and I'm with the Swedenborg Foundation. Swedenborg Foundation is a nonprofit group whose mission is to get the ideas and the concepts that Swedenborg wrote about out into the conversation. So that's what we're trying to do a little bit of today. What we're going to be doing is continuing our journey through Swedenborg's book, Our Life After Death, which is an excerpt published by the Foundation of his longer book, Heaven and Hell. You can download that book for free if you want to follow along. There's a link here that you can type this into your computer. We shortened it as much as we could. You can download an ebook or PDF there. If that seems too daunting, you can go to Swedenborg.com, and in the bottom left, it's there as a new release, or go into their ebook section. Again, free download of the PDF or the ebook version, whichever one you want to follow along with, and you can take this journey with us. Briefly, the book is an account of Emanuel Swedenborg's descriptions of the afterlife. And Swedenborg, very briefly, was a scientist, a famous scientist who was doing real well, and suddenly began to have this series of what we would today call spiritual experiences. And he began this odyssey, and he wrote it all down. He got to explore the whole afterlife. He got to see the nature of reality, what causes things, what things mean, everything from dreams to spirits to nature to everything. So we're going to take a look at a tiny little slice of that, and we're going to walk through it together, because the way he writes it, sometimes it's cool to kind of have a group thinking about it. We want this to be a group discussion. I mean, I'm here hosting it, but I'd love to have you guys chiming in. The way that you can do that is to ask questions or leave comments. You're watching this on YouTube right now, probably. Just comment there. I think it's on the right-hand side when it's a live event. Just click the comment button and leave one. Or if you don't have a YouTube account or a Google account, and you got here from Facebook on Heaven and Hell, just go back there and leave a comment, and we'll try to get to it, and we'll bring it up here so we can have kind of a group discussion, because that would be cool. So before we get into the text, I was thinking, Swedenborg, as I was saying, describes things about all of life, and really, to understand the world he's talking about, you kind of got to see it through the worldview that he expresses. So we want to try to look at this material with a Swedenborgian lens, if you will, if we can. And the one way to do that is what I would call the pairing of love and wisdom. This is one of the central themes. Go anywhere in Swedenborg's works, and he'll be talking about this pairing. Sometimes it's called the pairing of good and truth, sometimes love and wisdom. And there's many facets to this, but as it applies here, the idea is that knowledge on its own is incomplete without love. And so we're here to try to gather knowledge, to try to learn things about the spiritual realities, and really to have that become the effective thing it was meant to be, we need to be taking it and thinking, how can this make me into a person who is more loving, treats others with kindness, is looking to make the world a better place. So if we can go in with that mindset of love plus wisdom, we should be in good shape. Thanks for hanging out. All right, so I'm going to be reading right through this text, right through the PDF. You can follow along with me if you like. Let's get right into it, and we'll be breaking to answer your questions and comments, so get those in there. All right, so we're going to start at the chapter. It's called Each of Us is Inwardly a Spirit. And if you downloaded this PDF, it's the second chapter, so up here you got this other stuff. Scroll down past the notes on the translation and all that to this. Each of us is inwardly a spirit, and we'll read through together and stop when the Spirit moves. Anyone who thinks things through carefully can see that it is not the body that thinks, because the body is material. Rather, it is the soul, because the soul is spiritual. The human soul, whose immortality has been the topic of many authors, is our spirit. It is in fact immortal in all respects, and it is also what does the thinking in our bodies. You see here, he was asserting and does that the conscious part of us is our spirit. So we're all having a spiritual experience of sorts right now. That I'm making sound waves, and they're hitting a microphone here, and they're traveling through your computer, and they hit your physical ear, and it rattles in there and does that. But the part of you that can hear, the part of you that's experiencing that is your spirit, and it's my spirit, getting input back on this end. So the spirit is the consciousness that's plugged in to our bodies. But as you'll see, that the spirit itself is not just a a blob, or it's got its own form. But we'll talk about that coming up. So I just want to touch on that initially. All right, let's get back to the PDF. This is because he's talking about the soul or the spirit. This is because it is spiritual, and the spiritual is open to the spiritual and lives spiritually through thinking and willing. So this is a kind of a Swedenborg sentence. You can see he uses the word spiritual a lot of times here, and there are different sort of shades of what each one means. So he's saying because the spirit is spiritual and the spiritual is open to the spiritual. And this spiritual right here, he's talking about, there's kind of a spiritual world. There's a whole other spiritual reality that's acting in tandem with the physical one that we live in. And the spiritual part of us, which we would call our spirit or our mind, is interacting with the physical world, but also, as he says, is open to the spiritual. So that means it's also getting input from the spiritual world, just like you're getting input from the physical world. Like I'm seeing there's photons of physical light coming out of these lights here. They're hitting my eyes, and I'm getting physical input that way. But there is spiritual input, which is coming into the spirit. And he's saying that we can kind of access that world through the spirit. So that's what that spiritual means in that sentence. And live spiritually through our thinking and willing. And this spiritually, I think he also has a connotation that spiritually is deeper, kinder, more at the core of things than earthly, as he would call it, or naturally. So he's kind of giving a nod to that the inner part of us could be more tuned in to the deeper things in life. So that's a little unpacking of that sentence there. Continuing, so all the rational life we can observe in our bodies belongs to the soul, and none of it to the body. Rational life being our thinking, cognating, what we're reflecting, all of that. Actually, the body is material, as just noted, and the matter that makes up the body is an added element, almost like an extension to the spirit. So you think of, as you'll see this theme coming back, that the body is a tool that the spirit is using. Its purpose, okay, so what's the purpose of the human body? Its purpose is to enable our spirit to lead its life and perform its services in a physical world that is material in all respects and essentially lifeless. So he's saying that essentially lifeless. So you look around the physical world, it's obviously not lifeless. I mean, there's life. I mean, we're physical beings. We're moving and talking right now. There are all kinds of plants and animals that have this life. But what he's saying is that on its own, the matter that makes up everything wouldn't do anything. It's the spirit inside that animates. That's what gives life. So everything that is alive has this spirit inside of it. And you see that you kind of have this theme running of that there's the world that we're in, but the spirit is what's really pulling the strings. And he kind of gets more and more into that, and the idea that, and you even see that in life, biologically, it's hard to define what life is. They had to come up with a bunch of characteristics. It's made of cells. It can seek out nourishment, reproduce. I forget the exact list, but it's not like this. Oh yeah, you find this, there's life. It's sort of this animation of matter. The matter itself isn't different, but there's this other force. And Swedenborg would say that is the spirit. So let's get back to the text. Since matter is not alive, only spirit is, we may conclude that whatever is alive in us is our spirit, and that the body only serves it exactly the way the tool serves a living force that makes it move. We may, of course, say that a tool works or moves or strikes, but it is a mistake to believe that it is a property of the tool and not of the person who is wielding it. So just as you would say, you wouldn't say like, man, that hammer made a really nice frame for this wall. It's the person, even though the hammer is what's coming into contact. And here, our bodies are what come in contact with the world. Our bodies are what come in contact to each other. But it's not the body that's actually doing things. It's the spirit behind it. So, seems reasonable enough. Let's take a quick break because we have a question that we would like to get to. So let's put that up on the screen and see what we've got. All right, and this came from YouTube. He says, I understand through Swedenborg that in the afterlife we all appear as our true selves. But if we are spiritual creatures on earth within physical vessels, how then can properties like how we look, talk, etc. change our character in both positive and negative ways and have such effect on our spiritual well-being? For example, in the case of a well-meaning person who may end up becoming spiteful and nasty to others due to being harassed about how they look. So that's a great thought and really appropriate for today's discussion. And I want to try to do it justice, so I'll take a shot at it. So yeah, he mentions, or he or she mentions in the beginning, the idea that Swedenborg says in the spiritual world, our spirit is our true selves. You know, that's the real us. There you're seen as you really are. But you know, the way that our false selves, or I mean these bodies are, can affect us a lot, can it? I mean, if the true self is you know, what we're thinking and feeling and our motives and who we are, the question is basically saying, what if somebody's body looks a certain way and they get teased a lot for it or something, and that affects who they are, you know, because you know, you have someone who's real good looking, they go through life and everyone's friendly to them and nice, and so it's easy for them to be nice back, but this other person is ridiculed, so they develop this kind of harsh exterior. Did they really get punished for that? You know, or doesn't it seem unfair that things were harder for them? And to that I would say that when Swedenborg talks about the true self and what forms and shapes it, it's intentions. The true self only becomes negative and evil out of a love for evil, if that makes sense, as in a love for ruling of other people, a love for self-centeredness, for using people. A reaction, you know, to being criticized, or a defense mechanism is a whole different thing. You know, it's just a protection of self, which is different than, oh, I'm going to go out there and actively try to exploit people. So that's initially, but then also, yes, everybody's got stuff on their plate. You know, look, people have vastly different life experiences and also vastly different natures. I mean, just tendencies. And Swedenborg talks about heredity, or the traits that we inherit. Some people never have to fight any battles about temper. You know, like some people never would think, I'm going to snap at someone. Other people have to fight with that their whole lives to try to keep it together, keep from snapping. You know, being cruel to people. So, is there like a test at the end of life where it's like, oh, how many times did you lose your temper? Oh, you passed because you never. No, everybody. It's all about what we do with what we're given. You know, if someone has a really hard time with their temper, but they're able to resist it once, I mean, that can be really meaningful. Whereas it's somebody who never fell into an allurement in drinking, you know, they're like, okay, but somebody who had a hard time with it, they'll tell you how many days they've been sober because it's such a big deal to them. So I hope that I mean, it's obviously a bigger topic, so I hope that does something to it. Anyway, that's a question. Thanks. Keep those coming. So if you're just joining us, you can be a part of the discussion by leaving a comment on YouTube, or a question on YouTube, or if you came here via Facebook, go back there, and if you don't have a YouTube account, can't leave a comment there, go back there and leave a comment or a question, and we'll bring it in, because we want it to be a discussion and to kind of hear from other people. So let's get back into the text. Since everything that is alive in the body, everything that acts and senses things because it is alive, belongs to the spirit alone, and none of it belongs to the body, it follows that the spirit is the actual person. And I think we kind of get that. I'll read this other sentence because it goes in with it. In other words, when seen for what we really are, we are spirits. We also have the same form as our spirits. So going back to this actual person thing, you know, you can kind of tell that we're not. Or there's even just kind of a common perception that you're more than your body. I mean, people talk about things like inner beauty, but then also, like, if I lost an arm or a leg, you wouldn't think I was less of a person. You know, there's something, obviously, the me, the character, isn't diminished. And also, you find when people are aging or dealing with get some kind of disease or some kind of injury, the spirit still feels like, oh, I could go do things, but the body won't keep up, and you really identify with your inner self. So anyway, he makes that distinction, and I think it's one that we make a lot. In other words, so I already read this, but in other words, when seen for what we really are, we are spirits, and we also have the same form as our spirits. You see, everything inside us that is alive and senses things belongs to our spirit, and there is nothing in us from head to toe that is not alive and able to experience the senses. This is why when our bodies are separated from our spirits, which is called dying, we still continue to be human and to be alive. So I want to look at this word here. Oops, let me try to really select this one well. Perfect. Okay, this word here, human. We can still continue to be human. He talks a lot about how we're still humans after death. We're still humans, and I think that comes from, in context, in Europe when he was writing, and this was in the 1750s, from then on for the latter half of the 1700s. There were a lot of sort of theories about what the spirit was. Nowadays it's very common to think of a spirit as a person. Near-death experiences, we have people say, oh, I saw my grandma, I saw my dad who had passed, or my brother or sister, and they look like people. But back in Swedenborg's day, there were a lot of theories that, that the spirit is just kind of a puff of air, or like disembodied consciousness or something, and he's very clear about saying, no, I mean, the spirit has a form, just like the body has a form, and he alludes to that, and we're going to get into it a little bit more in a second, but that's what he means when he says human. It's not that we're human, because that word, as we use it, has so many different connotations. We can be saying, I'm only human, as in I had mistakes, or that's inhuman, how could you do something that's evil? So there are so many different ways that we use that word, and this is a little bit of what he means by that word here. All right, so looking back at the PDF, we still continue to be human and to be alive. I have heard from heavenly sources that some dead people, and as he just defined it, dead person is just your spirit has separated from your body, while they are lying in the coffin before they have been restored to life after death, continue to think even in their cold bodies. They cannot help but feel that they are alive, except that they cannot move a single atom of the matter that makes up their bodies. So that's like an interesting little bit of trivia that he threw in there. If I were you, I might, what's that? Like, that, I don't want that. What is that? People are lying in for a while, and he just gives a little note to it. And from what I've seen of Swedenborg, there's a lot more to it usually. So I would give that the benefit of the doubt that the experience he's talking about there isn't one that's weird or uncomfortable. It's just like part of a transition, because as he describes it, as anyone who's had a near-death experience describes it, the transition itself is peaceful and a happy thing. So, but he will just throw in all kinds of interest. He's seen a lot of detail, and he'll just throw it in, and that's one of the things I like reading about Swedenborg. So I'd say, give it the benefit of the doubt that however the transition goes, it's something good. So we're going to move in a little bit to talking about thinking and willing, as Swedenborg puts it. And you know how before I said that there's the love and wisdom, good and truth. Also, it says that all of creation has this duality in it. There's in each one of us, he says, in every created thing there is an element of the two great forces. And in us, there are the two parts inside us which he calls thinking and willing, or will and understanding, or volition and discernment. Basically thoughts and feelings. And he says that these two essential qualities make us who we are, and he has a lot to say about how the two interplay with each other, and what leads to what, and how one affects the other. So we're going to take a peek. So when he says think or will here, that's what he's talking about. All right, so he says, we could not think or will anything if there were nothing supporting our thought and will, some substance where thinking and willing arise and in which they take place. So he's getting into an interesting concept here, where he's saying you kind of think of thoughts and feelings as just they don't have a shape, they don't have a form. They just occur in some kind of spiritual matrix or ether or something like that. But he's saying that, like, he makes the comparison of that eyesight happens within the context of the eye. Hearing happens within the context of the ear. Like there are these organs that are they need to be there, and they need to be structured like that in order to make hearing possible. And he's saying that thoughts and feelings need those same structures. So that's what he's talking about there. We may imagine something happening apart from a supporting substance, but nothing like that exists. We can tell this from the fact that we could not see without an organ that's... Oh, this is where I got that from. We can tell this from the fact that we could not see without an organ that supports our sight, or hear without an organ that supports our hearing. Apart from these, sight and hearing would be nothing, would not exist. The same holds true for thought, which is inner sight, and for perception, which is inner hearing. And this gets into that the human form, that our spirit is in the human form that he's talking about. That a spirit is just as structured and complex as the body is. It's not just an ethereal kind of blob that floats around. It's real. Unless these arose from and happened in substances that took up the form of supporting organs, they would not happen at all. So you see, he's talking about this a lot. This idea that the spiritual world is not. You look at the physical world, and it's full of order, and it's full of laws, and you like law of gravity, laws of biology, laws of physics, and the structures are so complex. You see here that inside living things, these cells and these membranes and these tissues, and he's saying that the spiritual world is the same. It's complicated, and it follows systems and rules, and it has all these intricate inner workings. It's not just like a downgrade in complexity and the ability to be fascinating. And he's saying that there we have the same, in the spiritual world there's the same complexity, and even more so. And that's what he's getting at here, is that thought and feeling, these things that he's calling spiritual processes, happen. There are physical organs in the body that answer, but on the spiritual side, that where you're getting these things from, there's the same complexity, and there needs just the way that brain neurons are so carefully organized, so too does the spiritual need to be organized carefully. So let's take a look back at the text, and you can see he says, we may gather from this that our spirit is also in a form, and that its form is that of a human being, and that it possesses its senses and sensory organs when it is separated from the body, just as it did when it was in the body. We may gather that the entire experience of the eye, the entire experience of the ear, in fact our sensory experience as a whole, belongs not to the body but to the spirit, which occupies the sensory organs completely, right through to their smallest feature. And what he's saying here is so that you have ears, eyes, everything like that, and he's saying that your spirit is completely plugged into everything. So every single nerve, in your ears, there's those little hairs that capture sound waves or react to sound waves. And he's saying even those, your spirit is plugged right into it. It's not just like a loose sort of, okay, you're connected. I mean, that it's interacting with all the little biological instruments that make it go. So that's the complexity of the relationship between soul and spirit. Spirit and body. Does that make sense? Hopefully that's making sense. Let me know if it doesn't in the comments. Speaking of comments, we've got a few here, so let's take a look at the first one. Thank you guys for writing in. So the first one that we got is from YouTube. Doing good from love and speaking truth from faith produce our substantial bodies. In effect, our substantial bodies are the sum total of everything we've said and done. Okay, so the person who wrote that knows Swedenborg, because that is what Swedenborg says about it. That which it could even be a quote from Swedenborg. It sounds a bit like it. And what that's basically saying is this concept of everything that we've said and done is written into the spirit. That what we are doing, the physical world is in a lot of ways a womb for the spiritual world. And as in the womb and the physical world, the whole thing is set up so the body can develop. In the spiritual world, our spirit is developing as we live in this physical world, and it's through our choices, through our actions, that we're forming our spiritual body. And so that's just that person is stating that there. Thank you very much for that. Okay, let's go to the next one. I think I can relate to that not being able to move when dead idea. I often have minor out-of-body experiences, and it feels like you are paralyzed. you have to learn how to move in spirit. So I appreciate that. I always like hearing, as I've said, when people are sharing a little bit of these experiences, because it's cool to hear, like, especially when spiritual experiences line up, and you have this person here saying that oh, it seems like I've had something similar. These kind of, and that interesting that you've got to learn how to use the spirit a little bit, and I think that speaks to, as I was saying before, the complexity and the realness of the spiritual dimension. That just like here, the body is a very complicated system, and if not everything's not in order, it doesn't work. The spirit, it doesn't just happen. That there are these systems in place, and that person is talking about learning. So I appreciate that. Thanks. All right, let's take one more, and then we'll go back. Moving in spirit is different from physically moving. You have to learn all over again. It might be something similar to what Swedenborg is meaning. So I think, yeah, that's also relating to that, and there is certainly a difference in moving of the spirit. It sounds like that person is talking from experience. But Swedenborg says that the spiritual world is similar to this world, but it's got a lot of different laws and governing principles. And one there is that movement there is based on thought or intention. And he says thought brings presence. That where your mind is wandering. We have that phrase. And he says that spiritual things leak into our physical vocabulary. He's saying where the mind is wandering, that's how it really works in the spirit. That where you're thinking about, that's where you head. And that actually people are grouped based on their motivations. So if people who love the same things gravitate toward each other. And there's much more to say on that, but I appreciate that. All right, we'll move on. We'll do another questions before we're done. So let's get back into the text here. Okay, this is why spirits see and hear and experience their senses just as much as we do. Though after they have left the body, this sensing does not take place in the physical world, but in the spiritual one. And he says that actually it's more vivid. And this is not just him, but anybody who's had any kind of near-death experience will say that is more real there than here. Someone said this life is like a comic book. So anyway, he says that you still have senses there. You can still see, hear, touch, taste, all that, smell. When they were in the body, their mental experience of the senses on the physical level occurred through the material part that was an added element to their spirit. And the material part he's talking about here is the body. However, they were throughout that time having mental experiences purely on the spiritual level through their thinking and willing. Okay, so do you catch this part here? He's saying that we are, if I'm reading it right, that we are having physical experiences through the spirit right now, as in my spirit is plugged into my body, and as he says, it's linked into all the nerves, everything in the hand, so that when I tap it, I can feel it. So that's like a physical experience through the spirit, because my spirit, through its connection with the body, is feeling that. But then also, we're all having purely spiritual experiences in our thoughts and feelings. That this is an input from a physical stimuli, and then the thinking and feeling is input from spiritual stimuli. So that's what he's talking about there. Let's take a look back at the PDF. I have presented this to persuade rational people that, so he often will just try to appeal to thinking. In his time, I'm sorry to stop mid-sentence like that, but in his time there was a lot of just believe what we tell you. From the churches of the time were very powerful, and there was a lot of believe what I tell you and leave it at that. And he's very much about chew this over. Does this make sense to you? It's got to check out with you before you can accept it. So that's what he's giving there. So I just want to point that out. I presented this to persuade rational people that when seen for what we really are, we are spirits, and that the physical part added to us so that we can function in the physical and material world is not the real person, but only the tool of our spirit. And I think that's just recapping kind of the thesis that this experience of the physical world and this life that is the one we know now, this is not the real thing. I mean, it's very real in a lot of ways, but this is sort of an outer shell to the actual experience of life that we not only are all headed towards, but are experiencing on a deeper level right now. getting to our last paragraph that we're going to read today. We're not going to go all the way through to the end of the chapter because last time we were long, like an hour. And I thought closer to half an hour is probably better. But in this last paragraph, he's just talking a little bit about experience. And what I said before, that I like it when people share their experiences, and part of that is probably because I have a background reading and being interested in what Swedenborg said, because it's so experience based. This happened to me, and I'm telling you that it happened. That's kind of what he's citing. So I always like to hear when, and really that's the way we relate about a lot of life. Like if someone's saying, like, look, this is making me sad, or I feel lonely today, or this thing happened to me today. I mean, it's so much of it is we're hearing each other's stories. So to hear his story and to hear your stories is a really cool thing. So I appreciate it. If you're just tuning in, hopefully this end part will be the best for you. But you can leave comments on below where you're watching it on YouTube, or if you go back to Facebook where you found it, leave a comment there, and we'll get you up here, because I want to hear about experiences, get questions, all that, to kind of make it a discussion. All right, let's get back to the last paragraph of the text that we're going to read here for today. A great deal of experience has taught me that with respect to our inner selves, we are spirits. Experience that would fill whole volumes, as they say, if I were to include it all. And the reason that he says that is, first of all, he did fill whole volumes. He filled almost 30 volumes just with his spiritual material, which was after his sort of awakening, or when he started to have these experiences. Before that, he had published tens and tens of scientific volumes. So he did, but he could have written a ton more, because he had one of the things that, if you're not familiar with Swedenborg, one of the things that makes him so interesting and unique is that his spiritual experiences were continuous and lucid, as in they were happening constantly all day, and he could affect them and ask to go places and kind of get through where he wanted to go. And this was happening for decades at the end of his life, like continuously. So when he says he could fill volumes, he could, and luckily he filled a lot of them that we can work through. But there's a lot more that he left unwritten. As they say, if I were to include it all. Okay. I have talked with spirits as a spirit, and I have talked with them as a person in a body. When I have talked with them as a spirit, they could not tell that I was not a spirit myself, in a form just as human as theirs. This is how my inner self looked to them, because when I talked with them as a spirit, they could not see my material body. So what he's saying there is that you could, he could, and he just was a regular person that happened to have this wild life experience, but we all have the same makeup. He was saying that he could talk to people who are spirits, meaning people who have died. People whose spirit and body aren't together anymore, who have moved on to the next phase. And he says that he could talk to them as a spirit. So he'd be out of his body talking to them, and he didn't look like himself physically, and sometimes he was his spirit. Did I say that well? He appeared as his inner self, or his spirit, and that we all have an outer self and an inner self, a spirit and a body, and that our body looks one way, but the spirit looks a different way. And as we were saying before, that the way it looks is kind of based on who we really are inside, the inner beauty thing that we talk about. All right, so we're gonna get to a few more questions, comments right now as we're getting ready to wrap up. Let's go to the first one now. I see human coming up a lot, but it seems that this would only make sense if animals have the same spirit-body combination. Does Swedenborg mention anything on this? That's a great point, and he does mention a lot on it. It's rather complex, just as the biology of humans and animals is complex. But generally, I would say he says that everything that's alive, as we said in the beginning, has a spirit. Has a spiritual force that's making it move. That physical matter on its own can't walk, can't move, can't function like life. He says that there's a distinction. Animals have a spirit, a certain kind of spirit that humans have an additional level of spirit, and you may even, that you see in the brain. There's a reptile brain and then kind of the mammal brain, but then there are these lobes that humans have, sharing with some of the higher primates. And I don't know where the line between human and animal. He doesn't make doesn't say a clear distinction there. I don't know where it ends and begins. And as is what are the more intelligent animals, elephants, that kind of stuff. I don't know. I would say that the human form he's talking about, that's a whole other subject, because he's really talking about the function, not necessarily the shape, but the way that all the systems interact, and the mechanics of a person. So anyway, he says that human beings have a sort of an introspective level that most animals don't necessarily have, where we can sort of think, what am I doing? Why am I doing it? Should I do that? Should I not do it? Is there a deeper meaning to life? Is there a God? These kinds of things. It's kind of why if a bear attacks someone, you don't have this sort of outrage, like what an evil bear, because you kind of, this is an animal. This is what they do. And we need to know their rules and work around them. So I don't know if that's a satisfying answer to the question, but he says that there is, everything is spiritual, and we're all part of the same life force. I mean, this is all coming out of God, animating everything, but there's a certain plane of rationality that differentiates human beings, whatever that means. So that's one. Thank you. Let's get to another one from YouTube. I see that people, even in the new church, often say that someone who died entered the spiritual world. But since we are all spirits, we are there now. And so there's a term in there that's the new church, which is sort of shorthand for, it comes out of Swedenborg, and that Swedenborg was describing what he called a new church. But church to Swedenborg had a different meaning than it means to most people. It had a couple of different meanings. One is an internal state of mind, basically, that you can have a church within you, and that meaning the joining of love and wisdom, and being a good person who looks to help. That is a church in you. He also said that he talked about that there's a new church coming for the human race, which means which he described as a new understanding. So sometimes people will form groups around Swedenborg. Will call it the new church, like, as in we're trying to get at this new understanding that he's talking about. Anyway, that's an aside. What the person is saying, that even people who are familiar with life after death and the idea of Swedenborg will say, like, oh, this person left when someone dies. You'll say they went to the spiritual world. But the point that they're making, which is the point he's making here, and a good point, is that we're in the spiritual world right now. We have spirits, and our spirits, are in the spiritual world, but we're just plugged into a body. But we're really we're dual citizens, if you will, because we're both physical and spiritual. We have our senses, and we also have thoughts and feelings, and the spiritual world is actually affecting us in our thoughts and feelings. So we are, in a sense, there now, even though we're plugged in to this world here. All right, so let's get to one more here. When you have an NDE, you don't have to try and move, you just go out. So this is somebody referencing, if you're just tuning in, we had an earlier discussion where Swedenborg described a phenomenon where some people, after they've died, spend time in the body, but are unable to move before they make a transition. And some people have said, oh, I'd had something like that, like an out-of-body experience, but I couldn't move. And this person is saying, when you have an NDE, which NDE means near-death experience, which is a term that was coined by Raymond Moody, and it is when I saw a light, I went. You've probably heard of them. So this person is saying, when you have an NDE, you just go right out. You don't have to think about it or worry about it. And I think this shows kind of the diversity. One thing that I've learned in working with the Swedenborg Foundation and kind of listening to people's stories is that there's a high diversity of experiences. Some people will have an experience where they don't have to think about moving, they just go. And the other people will have an experience where they're stuck and they can't. And isn't that kind of like life, where people have such vastly different experiences of life, even though we're all on the same planet in a relatively similar, form, the human form. There's such a difference in what people experience in circumstances and in events, and there's similarly with people's spiritual experiences. And it's been really cool to me to hear about everyone's experiences and realize that there's such a variety. Anyway, so we're gonna wrap it up there as far as the questions go. All right, so as a final little segment to the show, I want to do something that I'm calling Correspondences, and this is another sort of Swedenborgian technique. And his idea of correspondences was this idea that we can see images, that all of the physical world reflects spiritual realities or reflects inner, deeper realities. And then we can see, if we look out at nature and things like that, that we can see images of the inner processes in the spirit. And I wanted to take a look at it here, and he actually said that one of the things that our site was meant for was to see objects, external physical objects, while picturing their deeper realities. So who knows if this is any good or not, but I wanted to try it out. So what I want to do here is look at, he said that light corresponds or is a symbol of an image of knowledge. That's why we say, oh, I see when I understand, or I was enlightened when I reached a new level. So he often talks about how the earth and things growing on it are kind of a symbol for us, for our minds, and for our character. So the image of light coming down to the earth is kind of an image of us being enlightened, or us taking on new knowledge and growing and opening. So since that's what we've been trying to do today, I thought we close by, you get the mindset of I'm going to show you a couple images in a little slideshow of light coming to the earth, and just to see this is telling me something deeper about the process that we just went through. This is an image of the human mind opening and bringing in knowledge. So let's try it out right now and just focus. It'll be short, just 30 seconds, but see if you can let a little of that in and get some deeper insights of your own. So, how was that? Good? I thought it was cool. Anyway, and that's a technique you can try anytime, just with anything, trying to picture sort of a deeper reality. What is this teaching me about the Spirit? What am I seeing? What is it teaching me about the Spirit? You guys have been awesome. If you're watching this recorded and you didn't get a chance to ask questions or make comments live, leave them anyway. We'll find them and I'll try to. The first one we answered this week was from a previous post, so you can leave comments even out on the recorded stuff, and then we'll try to get to it next time. We really appreciate it. Finally, if you guys want to support this program, the Swedenborg Foundation runs this off donations. It's a nonprofit 501c3, and if you just make a little PayPal donation, just go to the description in this YouTube video, click the link. If you donate, we'll actually get matched 5-to-1 by a foundation, so your money will go a long way. Really appreciate it. We're going to do this again next week, so I hope we'll see you guys there. And thank you very much for your questions and for letting me have this discussion with you. And it's fascinating stuff, and you guys make it. So next Monday, 8 o'clock, hope to see you there, and hope you have a great week in between.